What's up, guys? Welcome to another range day. We got a big day ahead of us today. We're going to be shooting my Sig Sauer MCX Virtus SBR in multiple configurations, including both 5.56 and 300 Blackout. Guys, if you enjoy the content that I'm making, then please make sure to like and subscribe and leave me a message down in the comments section. I hate asking, but it really does help the algorithm a lot, so I would really appreciate it. And if you ring the bell icon, you should get notifications when new videos are released as well. Additionally, if you want to get more Chester's Hobbies content, you can follow me on Instagram, where you can see what I'm working on and get previews of upcoming videos. I'm also pretty active on Reddit if you'd like to follow along with the conversations there. Alright, well that's enough of that, so back to the gun of the day, my Sig Sauer MCX Virtus SBR. Guys, I've been looking forward to this video for a long time now. My MCX is one of my absolute favorite guns that I own, so I'm really excited to showcase what it can do today. Now, the MCX Virtus is the second generation of the Sig MCX line, which itself is an evolution of their 500 series rifles. Sig recently announced their Generation 3 MCX, the Spear LT or Spear Light, so we'll be talking a little bit about some of the differences as we go. Now, on the surface, the MCX might just look like a fancy AR-15, but it's actually quite a bit different. It's a short-stroke gas piston operated rifle that's incredibly reliable and highly modular, loosely based on the AR-18 design. Now, this design internalizes the spring system within the upper receiver with the bolt system and eliminates the need for a buffer tube. Sig then puts a 1913 Picatinny rail system on the rear of the lower receiver, which allows the end user to mount a wide variety of braces and stocks that can fold or collapse, and it can even shoot while folded or collapsed, unlike a traditional AR-15. Now, the MCX is an extremely smooth shooting firearm, and short-stroke piston guns like the MCX are often considered to be inherently ideal suppressor hosts because the short-stroke piston design really minimizes the amount of gas getting back into the bolt and upper receiver area, making for a much cleaner operation when shooting suppressed over something like a direct impingement style AR-15 that's constantly dumping filthy gases and carbon back into the upper receiver with every shot. Now, all that is great and can honestly be said about a lot of short-stroke piston guns, but what really sets the MCX Virtus apart is its modularity. As you can see here, I have several handguards and an extra barrel lined up. I want to do more than just tell you about how modular and cool the MCX is today. I want to actually show you how modular it is. So we're going to be shooting my MCX Virtus in multiple configurations, and we can do that in one single session because the MCX is so modular that you can actually make these changes in the field or on the range with minimal tools. So let's talk a little bit about what the MCX can do. Much like the 9mm Sig MPX that I've talked about before, if you pop out the lower receiver's front pivot pin, the handguard will slide right off, revealing two screws that are torqued to about 60 inch-pounds holding the barrel in place. To swap barrels, all I have to do is pop off the handguard, unscrew those two barrel mounting screws, pull out the barrel, slide the new one in, torque it down to spec, install the handguard I want to use, and I'm ready to go. It's incredibly easy and impressively effective. Right now I have my MCX configured with an 11.5-inch 5.56 barrel and a 10-inch standard handguard. After we shoot this one for a while, we're going to come back to the table and convert it to a 6.75-inch 300 Blackout rifle with an oversized suppressor-ready handguard that will allow me to countersink my suppressor under the handguard while still maintaining a strong support hand grip and leverage. This is going to be really cool, so make sure you stick around for both iterations. So starting with my 11.5-inch 5.56 setup, this is easily one of my favorite 5.56 guns to shoot. It's incredibly smooth and flat shooting, and I actually haven't shot it in a while, so I'm really excited to get it out today. I'll be doing a comparison video soon comparing my MCX Virtus to my Bren 2 and Scar 16 SBRs as well, so if that's something you're interested in, then make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss it. Aside from the smooth and well-gassed 11.5-inch MCX 5.56 barrel, a lot of the magic of this particular setup actually comes from the muzzle device that I'm running. I'm a big fan of the Dead Air Chemo mounting system. I know some people feel it's too heavy, but for me that gets outweighed by the benefits that it provides. For one thing, I don't always shoot suppressed. I usually shoot about half and half depending on the day, so I like to have an effective muzzle device for when I'm shooting unsuppressed. I love Dead Air's muzzle brakes and flash hiders. They're all really effective, but there's also very strong third-party support for chemo. So for example, on my 11.5-inch 5.56 barrel in this MCX, I actually have a Lantac Dragon muzzle brake that utilizes the chemo mounting system. This muzzle brake is incredible on here. It does a phenomenal job, and as long as I'm doing what I'm supposed to, the gun basically doesn't move when I'm shooting it. I love it. Now, when I do shoot suppressed, I love how fast and secure the chemo ratcheting system is. I use my Dead Air Sandman-S for my 5.56 guns, and it's both bomb-proof and low back pressure, providing a comfortable experience for the shooter. For 300 Blackout, I actually really like using my Silencerco Omega 300, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. One thing that can be a little bit confusing about the MCX is the use of the adjustable gas settings. The MCX features essentially two settings, plus for more gas and minus for less gas. Now, typically my preference is to have a well-tuned setting for unsuppressed fire and another well-tuned setting for suppressed fire, which is how I have both my Scar 16 and Bren 2 set up. Unfortunately, that's not really the case with the MCX Virtus. My gun cycles without issue both unsuppressed and suppressed on the minus setting, so there's no additional setting to reduce the gas when shooting suppressed, unfortunately. It's not the end of the world, honestly, because it's very smooth in both scenarios, and technically it's easier to not have to adjust the gas setting when switching back and forth. I just always feel like I could be leaving some performance on the table if I'm not maximizing certain elements of the setup. At the end of the day, this is a really mild gripe on my part. It runs great both unsuppressed and suppressed. I'm just being a little picky here. A lot of people seem to think these MCX Virtus M-LOK handguards are too big and too heavy, and that was addressed by Sig on the latest version of the MCX, the Generation 3 Spear LT. The handguard on the Spear LT is much lighter and not as large. I've heard good things about it, but I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. Now, personally, while the handguards on my MCX Virtus are definitely larger than many of the other handguards that I'm used to, I have relatively large hands and I actually love these handguards. I think they're highly functional, very comfortable, and really cool looking. Another complaint that people had about these handguards is that because they're only retained by the front pivot pin in the lower receiver and a guide that clicks into the upper receiver, they can't really produce a reliable zero with things like IR or visible laser lasers. It's definitely a valid point and one that Sig has addressed with the new MCX SBR, which now uses a screw system for the new handguard. Now technically the SBR is losing a little bit in the rapid modularity department with this move, but I can see why being able to maintain a reliable zero with various accessories would be more important to most people than being able to quickly remove the handguard. For me personally, I'm not running IR or visible lasers or any sighting tools for that matter on my MCX handguards, so it really doesn't bother me at all, and I love how easy it is to quickly swap handguards. Now in this handguard, I'm running one of my favorite vertical grips, the BCM M-LOK vertical grip. It makes it really easy to get a ton of leverage with a solid thumb over bore grip, which is my preferred shooting grip with my rifles. Now for optics on my MCX Virtus upper, I have a Sig Romeo 4T red dot with a Sig Juliet 4x magnifier with a flip to side mount. I love this setup. It works great for me and gives me a lot of versatility. Now anyone that has a lot of experience with AR-15s might wonder why the ability to quickly swap barrels and handguards is such a big deal on the MCX, when with an AR-15 you could swap entire upper receivers even quicker. The primary difference here is that when swapping handguards and barrels, you get to keep your optics in place and you don't have to mess around with changing buffers or spring configurations either. So if you have an optic setup that you love and you want to use it with multiple calibers, you can do so with the MCX Virtus, and in my experience the zero shift is quite minimal even after swapping barrels and calibers. It's really cool, honestly. Now, is an AR-15 technically easier and faster to swap? Yes, absolutely. But in my mind, the MCX system represents a very cool and interesting piece of technology, and I love having these different options available. Rounding out the upper receiver, I actually kept the standard MCX Virtus charging handle. Some people complained about gas blowback in the original MCX when shooting suppressed, which much like an AR-15 is often coming through the charging handle port in the back of the upper receiver. Many people have even upgraded to an ambidextrous Radian Raptor charging handle for their MCX to improve on that. But in the case of the Virtus, Sig listened to customer feedback and built their ambidextrous charging handle for the Virtus to be somewhat similar in design to something like the PRI Gas Buster. Now, I did actually pick up the Radian charging handle and test them side by side early on, and I found the shooting experience to be about the same or slightly better with the standard Virtus charging handle, so I just stuck with this one. Keep in mind that I do shoot exclusively outside, so that likely has an effect on the amount of gas that I receive when I'm shooting suppressed out here. Now, the lower receiver on the MCX Virtus is excellent, with ambidextrous magazine releases and safety levers. The biggest upgrade for me on the Gen 3 MCX or SBR is the inclusion of a bolt hold open and release lever on the right side of the lower receiver. I love that design, and as you can see here, I've actually done something very similar with my MCX Virtus by installing the Parker Mountain Machine BCD or battery control device. This is essentially their version of a Magpul bad lever, but made specifically for the MCX. I love bad levers personally, and this Parker Mountain Machine BCD works beautifully for me. I'm really glad to see more companies incorporating this sort of functionality on their firearms from the factory because, in my opinion, being able to manipulate the bolt while maintaining a strong hand grip on the gun is a massive functionality and manual of arms improvement over standard AR-15 style controls. I also love the Sig Machine QD slots into the lower receiver. I've said this before, and I really wish that more companies would get on board with this. It's such a great way to run a sling across multiple rifles. Now on my Virtus, these slots are made of aluminum. On the new SBR, they added steel inserts, which should last longer and be more durable in the long run. That's a nice upgrade for sure, but so far I haven't had any issues with my Virtus QD slots. They work great with my Savvy Sniper sling. And the MCX Virtus comes stock with Sig's Match Light Duo trigger, which is actually quite nice. It's really kind of great, honestly. I actually recently picked up and installed the proprietary Geisley trigger for the MCX, and I have to say I was really surprised that it didn't feel like a big improvement. It almost felt like a slight downgrade in the pull weight, so I measured, and sure enough, the Geisley trigger was pulling it around 4.5 pounds, and the Sig trigger was pulling it around 3.5 pounds. I think the reset and break are maybe a little bit cleaner on the Geisley, but the Sig trigger is still really good, so I ended up just putting the Sig trigger back in for this session. Seems like the Geisley MCX trigger is based more on their standard SSA trigger and not on the SSAE that I love in my Battle Arms SBR, so that's probably what threw me off a little bit. Either way, we'll see how this one runs today and see if I regret taking the Geisley out. It's worth noting that's another one of the smart improvements that Sig made to the new SBR. It can now take any standard mil-spec AR trigger, meaning they can now take standard Geisley triggers or other excellent triggers without needing to pay extra for the MCX specific trigger, which is definitely a welcome improvement. If the Geisley MCX trigger felt like my SSAE or Super Scar triggers, I definitely would have kept it in, but I remember really enjoying this trigger under live fire previously, so we'll see how it does for me today. Now there are a ton of options for folding and collapsible stocks that work with the 1913 Picatinny rail slots on the rear of the lower receiver. I've tried a few different options, but my favorite is definitely this folding and collapsing stock from Sig. I think it looks great and it's really comfortable without being too heavy. Speaking of weight, that's actually one of the biggest changes made to the new SBR. While the original MCX was extremely light with a pencil profile barrel, the Generation 2 MCX Virtus was often criticized for being excessively heavy. The new SBR cut the base weight by about a pound, which is pretty impressive actually. They did this by shaving weight in various areas, including the barrel, handguard, and receivers. A little here and there tends to go a long way. As for my MCX Virtus, in this 11.5-inch configuration that you see it here, it weighs about 8 pounds 11.6 ounces with an empty magazine. That's pretty heavy. It's not quite scar heavy, but it's definitely heavy. For me though, in my opinion, the 11.5-inch setup still balances quite well, and my 300 Blackout setup is a little bit lighter. A good friend of mine has a 16-inch Virtus, and we found that one to be fairly front heavy, but these short barrel setups balance pretty well for me personally. Keep in mind as well, this Juliet 4 magnifier weighs about 12.5 ounces, so if I take that off, then the setup weighs just under 8 pounds, which isn't as bad. Lastly, the MCX Virtus Virtus comes in this Virtus gray color, which I really love. I'm a big fan of black and gray setups, and while I'm not usually one to Cerakote my guns, if they happen to come that way from the factory, I can get pretty on board with it, and I really love the way that this one looks. It's also really cool that almost all the handguards I purchased for it have matching colors as well. Really kind of satisfies my OCD personally. All right, so that's what we got going on for today, guys. Remember to stick around for the whole video because we're going to start off shooting this 11.5-inch 5.56 configuration, then later we're going to swap over to my 6 3/4-inch 300 Blackout setup and run that for a bit as well. I'm super excited, so let's hit the range and have some fun. So guys, I want to give you an idea of what the Sig MCX Virtus sounds like shooting both unsuppressed versus suppressed with supersonic 5.56 ammo and the 11.5-inch barrel. So I'm going to start off with 2 shots unsuppressed, slow fire into the pumpkin, and then I'm going to attach the dead air Sandman-S and fire 2 more shots suppressed, again slow fire into the pumpkin. Later on I'll also cut in a comparison with suppressed subsonic 300 Blackout using the Silencerco Omega 300. So let's start off with 5.56 unsuppressed. Okay. We'll attach Sandman-S. Suppressed. Alright guys, this day has been so much fun already, but it's about to get even better. We're going to convert my 5.56 MCX rifle into a 300 Blackout setup and make things real quiet. Now I'll be giving my thoughts on both setups at the end of the video, so make sure to stick around for that, but for now let's dive into this conversion. Now unfortunately I can't actually show you how to do this conversion, but there are some great videos out there from Sig that show how it's done if you're curious. What I'm going to do instead is set up a timer and put the camera on that and speed up the footage so we can see how long it takes to remove the handguard and barrel and install the new handguard, barrel, and suppressor and complete the 300 Blackout conversion. Alright, so let's get started. Once I'm done, I'll go over my 300 Blackout setup and we'll head back out to the range. All right, guys, here we go. Time starts now. All right, guys, we are done. Let's take a look. So you can see we've now converted this setup to 300 Blackout. You can see my 5.56 11.5-inch barrel has been removed. The 10-inch handguard has been removed. I now have a 12-inch suppressor-ready handguard with a 6 3/4-inch 300 Blackout barrel and my Silencerco Omega 300 tucked underneath the handguard. And there you have it, guys. It took me just about 3.5 minutes to convert my MCX from an 11.5-inch 5.56 setup to the 6 3/4-inch 300 Blackout setup. I love this setup so much, so let's talk about what we changed. So I'm using the Sig MCX Virtus 6 3/4-inch barrel conversion kit, which in this configuration does not require any modifications to the bolt, so that's really cool. One thing that's really interesting about this barrel is that the gas system is set up to only run suppressed. So in this configuration, the 2-position gas block allows you to switch from supersonic to subsonic, but both have to be suppressed in order to function. Now I always shoot 300 Blackout suppressed anyway and almost always subsonic, so this doesn't bother me at all, but it is something to keep in mind. I also have a 9-inch 300 Blackout barrel that can run both unsuppressed and suppressed, but I tend to prefer the more compact package of this setup usually. Now I've got a 12-inch suppressor style handguard that slides over the barrel and allows my Silencerco Omega 300 to be tucked underneath, mounted on a forward controls combination flash hider and compensator chemo muzzle device. Now my Omega 300 is my first rifle suppressor that I got and I love it. I honestly didn't really have any issues with the Silencerco ASR mounting system like some people have. When I started getting into dead air products, I decided to convert my Omega 300 over to the chemo system so I could use all my rifle suppressors on all my hosts. What's great about the chemo system in this setup is that I can ratchet the suppressor on without having to remove the handguard to flip a locking switch or anything like that. I find personally for me with 300 Blackout, the Omega 300 is a bit quieter than the Sandman-S, and since I'm only shooting 300 Blackout subsonic, I really don't need the extra durability of the Sandman-S for this application. For vertical grip on this setup, I'm running a Sig M-LOK vertical grip. And lastly, when I switch to 300 Blackout, I usually take the Juliet 4x magnifier off to save some weight and lighten up the setup a little bit. Now, I don't have a ton of 300 Blackout ammo with me today because it's really expensive right now, but I'm going to try to switch up the setups with these other handguards a couple of times so you can see what those look like as well. This one here is a 10-inch suppressor ready handguard with a BCM vertical grip. And this one here I believe is a 6-inch handguard from Midwest Industries. Got a Troy aluminum M-LOK vertical grip on there. And this handguard makes the setup extremely compact, more similar to the Sig MCX Rattler than a traditional Virtus. And that's actually it for changes, guys. Everything else is exactly the same as before. So let's get back out on the range and see how the MCX Virtus runs with a short 300 Blackout setup. Now here's 2 shots suppressed of subsonic 200 grain 300 Blackout. Guys, I said it in the intro, but it's worth repeating. My Sig MCX Virtus SBR is easily one of my favorite guns to shoot. It's absolutely incredible. I shot about 235 rounds of 5.56 and 150 rounds with 300 Blackout and had absolutely zero failures today. So 100% reliability, which is exactly what I would expect from the MCX. All right, so let's talk about the shooting experience. So starting off with the 11.5-inch 5.56 setup, it is absolutely insane how flat shooting this gun is unsuppressed. The Lantac Dragon break is really fantastic. Doubles and triples are extremely easy to pull off. It's just phenomenal. The unsuppressed recoil impulse on the 11.5-inch 5.56 MCX is really soft and pleasant, partially because it's so well gassed and also partially due to the relatively heavy weight of the gun as well, which does soak up some of that recoil impulse. And it definitely is really well gassed. Unsuppressed, I was getting a near perfect 4 o'clock to 4:30 ejection with Wolf brass case 5.56 ammunition. I will say that Wolf ammunition is relatively low powered, and so there were a few times that the bolt didn't lock back for me on an empty magazine, but I never had a single issue cycling when rounds were still in the mag, so I'm not too worried about it. Now the Lantac Dragon does throw a decent amount of concussion back at the shooter while firing, which is worth noting and to be expected with such an effective break on such a short setup. But for me personally, once I got used to it, I found it to be completely manageable and absolutely worth it because of how incredibly flat the gun shoots as a result. It is just effortlessly fast. It's so fun and visceral feeling, guys. But keep in mind that if you're going to be shooting something like this at an indoor range, you and anyone else unlucky enough to be on the range with you probably won't enjoy the experience very much. Now, as far as unsuppressed 5.56 SBRs go, I have to say I think my MCX Virtus in this 11.5-inch configuration is probably the flattest that I've ever shot. It's really amazing and so much fun to run. Now, when running this configuration suppressed with my dead air Sandman-S, it runs very, very well. It's definitely not as smooth as my custom Battle Arms AR-15, but it's still very smooth and tons of fun. Because there's no option to reduce the amount of gas going through the system when shooting suppressed, the recoil impulse is definitely a bit punchier suppressed than unsuppressed. I think the ejection was averaging around 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, which is actually pretty impressive considering you're not able to adjust the gas for suppression. But it's definitely worth noting that it's a bit punchier feeling suppressed. I think it's a bit punchier than my CZ Bren 2 with a suppressor setting on. But we'll have to wait until my MCX versus Bren versus Scar video comes out to figure that one out for sure. Now, I really didn't experience much gas at all, even under rapid fire. But again, I'm outside in the open air, so your experience on an indoor range, if that's where you primarily shoot, could be completely different. It's also worth noting that I'm not exactly doing full mag dumps out here either, so that could also be a different experience if that's what you're looking to do. Weight and balance-wise, the MCX is definitely a little bit on the front heavy side with the Sandman-S and E-brake on the end of the muzzle like that. It's definitely manageable, but it is pretty heavy. I've got a Dead Air Sierra 5 suppressor in jail right now, which I'll be really excited to try out on this gun once it's approved. Unsuppressed, the 11.5-inch setup balanced actually really well for me, but overall, I will say the extra weight is pretty noticeable over the course of an extended session, so it's something to keep in mind. I did end up taking the Juliet 4 magnifier off for a good portion of the shooting, partially to save a little bit of weight, and I also thought that aesthetically it was getting in the way a little bit of some of the camera angles I was using. Certainly it doesn't affect the function at all, and I love being able to use it at long distance, and then just flip it up to the side when I move in for a closer shot. It's really, really cool. The Juliet magnifier also connects to the rails with a really nice QD mount. It makes it really easy to quickly install it or remove it entirely if I don't feel like running it. So as far as the individual components on the MCX, the Sig Matchlight Duo trigger actually ran great for me. I honestly think I'm going to try to return or sell that Geisley trigger because I honestly don't think the Virtus needs it. I think the Geisley trigger was a huge upgrade for the Gen 1 MCX, but for the MCX Virtus with the Matchlight Duo trigger, it's got a really clean break and a quick reset, and it really feels excellent to me. The ambidextrous safety worked perfect for me, so no complaints at all there. I love this Sig Sauer adjustable folding stock. It's very lightweight and extremely comfortable, with a decent enough chic while considering there's not a ton of recoil with this gun. I know some people have had issues with the Sig stock folding mechanisms. I will say that I found some to be stiffer than others, but this one is extremely smooth and easy to actuate for me. The new MCX BRLT does have a new folding hinge design that uses a button instead of opposing pressure. I haven't had the chance to try it yet, but I'm sure a lot of people will think that that's an improvement. For me personally, I've really gotten used to these and I think they work fine for me. The QD sling point worked great for me with my Savvy Sniper sling. I really haven't noticed any wear or damage yet, but it's something I'll keep an eye on over time. I actually really like this pistol grip that came with the Sig Sauer MCX. It reminds me a lot of the Magpul K2 grip, which is one of my all-time favorites. It's a great grip angle for a short-barreled rifle setup. It's a really good size for my hands with some decent texture as well. The Parker Mountain Machine battery control device worked fantastically for me. Really speeds up reloads for me to be able to drop the bolt with my trigger finger. And it's a huge manual of arms improvement in my opinion to be able to lock the bolt back without breaking my strong hand grip. The magwell is extremely smooth and makes reloads almost effortless. I really love the Sig Romeo 4T red dot. It's got a very clear viewing window, multiple reticle options with a red dot or a circle dot, and the Sig Juliet 4x magnifier is great. 4x magnification is really nice, the glass is pretty clear, and the ability to quickly flip the magnifier off to the side and back again is just awesome, really easy, and super functional. Alright, so that covers the 11.5-inch 5.56 setup. Let's talk about the 6.75-inch 300 Blackout setup. Guys, 300 Blackout is just so much fun to shoot. I really wish it was more affordable because I'd be shooting it all the time. Subsonic 300 Blackout moves slower than standard 9mm, but with considerably more energy and a much heavier bullet, so it's highly effective, can be shot at steel up close, and it's really, really quiet with this Omega 300 suppressor. Another nice thing about the MCX is since there's no buffer tube like on an AR-15, you don't get any of that buffer spring twang that you often hear people complaining about in their suppressed ARs. I often describe the sound of suppressed 300 Blackout as basically being like a nail gun. It's not Hollywood quiet by any means like 22 LR is, but as far as sturdy caliber rifle cartridges go, it's extremely quiet and tons of fun. The MCX Virtus feels great to me in this setup. The recoil is very mild and manageable, and it's dangerously easy to blow through ammo under rapid fire. Now, I only say dangerously because of the crazy cost of ammo right now, which for for subsonic 300 Blackout is around $1.25 per round on the low end, which is just insane. I do have the materials and tools for reloading, but honestly I'm just far too busy and haven't been able to set aside time for it. So more often than not, I just end up buying factory ammo. When it comes to something like 300 Blackout, it hurts quite a bit, so I really don't shoot it much, unfortunately. But when I do, man, it's just really, really fun. The conversion from 5.56 to 300 Blackout went really well. It only took about 3.5 minutes to change calibers, including the barrel and handguard swap. And honestly, I actually hadn't done it in over a year, so I probably could have done it a bit faster if I practiced beforehand. Another thing that was really awesome is that the change in zero was less than 2 MOA, so it was really easy to account for. I honestly didn't even adjust the zero on the red dot at all, and for the most part, I really didn't miss at all, even at 80 yards. The only times that I missed was when I over or undercompensated on a target transition. With 300 Blackout suppressed with a 6 3/4 inch barrel, it is so smooth shooting, guys. I was getting a perfect 4 o'clock ejection pattern with just a real smooth and soft recoil impulse. I'd say there's considerably more weight behind the recoil impulse than 300 Blackout versus 5.56, which makes sense when you consider the weight of a 200 grain bullet versus the weight of a 55 grain bullet, but just something kind of interesting and worth noting. Now, I did really enjoy using all 3 handguard configurations with my 300 Blackout setup. Of the 3, I have to say the one that's currently installed on the gun, which is the 10-inch suppressor-ready handguard with the BCM vertical grip, was probably my favorite. I think I have the best combination of both balance and leverage in terms of my ability to get my support hand extended out on the handguard. The 6-inch handguard from Midwest Industries is really nice and compact and lightweight, but I typically like getting my support hand further out along the handguard towards the muzzle whenever I can to help control recoil and muzzle rise. But otherwise, all 3 setups felt great to me and it was really easy and fun to swap back and forth. I mentioned before that the 11.5-inch 5.56 setup with the Juliet 4 magnifier is about 8 pounds, 11.6 ounces, and that's just under 8 pounds if you take off the Juliet 4 magnifier. I don't know the exact weights of these 3 different 300 Blackout setups off the top of my head, but I'll make sure to annotate them in the video for anyone that's curious. Now, if you're looking for a do-it-all rifle that can quickly swap calibers, you might be wondering what makes more sense. An MCX like this with spare barrels and handguards, or an AR-15 where you can just swap uppers? Honestly, I would say for most practical purposes, an AR-15 lower receiver with multiple upper receivers is probably the better and more versatile option. The only real downsides to keep in mind is that you need to be swapping optics to a new upper or have spare optics pre-installed on your other upper. Or if you want to swap handguard configurations for some reason, it wouldn't be nearly as quick and field-friendly as the MCX. Or you could potentially look at the weight savings of carrying a barrel and handguard and not the rest of an upper receiver in your pack. And also, when you're switching calibers from something like 5.56 to 300 Blackout, on standard AR-15 with a buffer tube setup, you might need to consider changing buffers and buffer springs as well, which is something to keep in mind. And definitely a big advantage for the MCX in that regard, because there's no buffer tube to contend with at all, and the performance with the caliber change was superb. It really didn't suffer at all. So other than those factors, you have way more options with the traditional AR-15 setup for various calibers and handguards, for example. Add to that Sig's unfortunate habit of releasing new generations of their firearms that are not backwards compatible, like the handguard setup on the SBR LT versus the Virtus, for example, and that does kind of make an AR-15 setup a bit of a safer choice for long-term investments. With the Virtus now being replaced by the SBR LT and a lot of the Virtus accessories being proprietary, it's anyone's guess how long those Virtus accessories are going to be available for. That said, in all honesty, I do have to applaud Sig's tenacity when it comes to innovation and consistently upgrading their platforms for the better. It's just kind of unfortunate that their most loyal customers sometimes seem to get left in the dust while they move forward. But beyond the practicality and modularity, is the MCX really worth it in general if you're only planning on using it for one caliber? In my mind, absolutely 100% yes, guys, no question. It's an incredibly smooth shooting, reliable, high quality firearm that's been tested and proven, comes with a wide variety of modularity and configuration options, including folding and collapsible stock and brace setups, various quick change handguards, and the short stroke gas piston design makes it very clean to run the gun both unsuppressed and suppressed. The ability to quickly swap barrels, calibers, and handguards to me is a very interesting piece of the technology behind the platform. As both a collector and a shooter, I find it really interesting and cool to own and experiment with. From a practical standpoint, I think the modularity is actually really awesome and impressive, but perhaps not the biggest selling point when you consider how easy it is to swap uppers on a standard AR-15. However, I'll say if you're interested in all the other advantages the MCX provides, then I think the additional modularity is a really cool bonus that's definitely worth exploring. Overall, guys, my Sig MCX Virtus SBR is easily one of my favorite guns to shoot, whether it's in 5.56 or 300 Blackout, and I can't wait to get it out again soon to pit it up against my Scar 16 and Bren 2 to see who the king of short stroke gas piston 5.56 guns really is. So that's going to be all for today, guys. We got a lot more videos coming up soon, including more ARs, AKs, PCCs, handguns, and shotguns. Remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by.